Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Now to Darwin Porter. Good morning, Darwin.
Good morning, Anita. It's very good to talk to you during these tumultuous days.
I feel like I'm in another country, actually.
The Republic hangs in the balance.
Oh, my goodness.
What do I want to talk about this morning? I want to talk about women who have had great power in the White House, although little is known about them.
Okay.
If Hillary Clinton becomes the first woman president of the United States Tuesday night, she won't be the first to have enormous influence in the White House. And two women preceded her. They were in the Depression era, Roosevelt's first two terms in the 30s. And the reason I'm talking about them is most of them are now, of these women, are forgotten in history. But two new books have come out perhaps just at the right time to interest people and documenting their lives. One woman was the longtime mistress of FDR, and the other woman was the longtime mistress of Eleanor Roosevelt, and they both lived at the White House. And one book is called The Gatekeeper, Miss Missy. Her real name was Margarita Missy Leon, FDR and the Untold Story of the Partnership That Defined the Presidency. And the other one is called Eleanor and Hick, The Love Affair That Shaped a First Lady. That one is by Susan Quinn. All right, let's maybe begin with a quick review of Eleanor and Franklin. Most people know that they married in 1905. Teddy Roosevelt gave the bride away. And a lot of people don't. Oh, he said, it's good to keep the Roosevelt name in the same family. So a lot of people don't know it, but FDR was distant cousins of George Washington, Ulysses S. Grant, and Sir Winston Churchill.
No, I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, see, I dig up all these little things. And it was never known why Franklin married Eleanor. Her mother called her Granny and mocked her for being ugly and told her she had buck teeth and no man would marry her. Yet she married FDR, who was handsome, rich, and the most sought-after bachelor in the Hyde Park area.
So tell me why.
Well, I think he saw in her, he needed maybe a strong woman behind him, although she didn't appear that at first. He must have sensed something because he had great ambitions. And instead of just marrying a pretty girl who would be some sort of docile housewife, he probably sensed her future greatness. That's, no one knows for sure. That's just a guess. But she had a secretary, Lucy Mercy, who was Eleanor's secretary. But in 1918, she discovered love letters between her husband and Lucy Mercy. Mm. She fired Lucy Mercy and banned her from the Roosevelt home at Hyde Park and in New York. And that was supposed to be the end of Lucy Mercy, but it wasn't. I'll get to that later. And she then, in 1920, as the world knows, James Cox and Roosevelt ran against Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge. Could you imagine a debate between FDR and Calvin Coolidge?
No.
And they lost. And Warren Harding began a scandal like the administration. But during this course of the campaign, FDR and Eleanor was very impressed with this young woman. And as I said, her name was Marguerite, but they called her Missy. And eventually, they asked her to come and help them with their staff. She seemed like a brilliant woman. And if you remember the movie actress Irene Dunn.
Yes, I do.
Missy was very much, her pictures resembled Irene Dunn, and she was a great organizer. But the very next year, Rose in 1921 at Campobello, the island home, vacation home of the Roosevelts, as the world knows, he contracted polio. Well, this became a great rallying cry and help because Missy just became his constant companion. Eleanor was sent off on various things to keep his name alive politically during the recovery. And her greatest time with him, they bought a houseboat, and they spent 4 months a year together off the coast of Florida, right near where you live.
On a houseboat?
And she had him together for just by herself for 4 months a year. Eleanor always had many things to do. And then when he sold the houseboat in 1927, she had a nervous breakdown that got so severe they put her on a suicide watch. Huh. That's how attached she was to him, because I think she began to realize that she would never have those 4 months every year with him. But and then, to complicate matters, the next year he said he would run for governor of New York. She didn't want him to do that because she thought it would kill him, really. And she had another nervous breakdown, and she attempted suicide again. But then she recovered, joined him in Albany, and then when he won the election as president in 1932, he moved her into the White House, and she became virtually the chief of staff. They called her the gatekeeper. I mean, many people think they got letters from FDR, but they were really written by her and signed by him. She determined who could see the president, who could not. He was, as you know, a blue blood aristocrat from Hyde Park, and she was actually what they used to call shanty Irish. Now, please, you know I adore the Irish, and it was a dirty term, but that's what she was called. But she had the blue-collar point of view, and she influenced him greatly, and Roosevelt didn't want Social Security, and she was one of the people who urged him to pass the Social Security bill, and many people drawing checks today can give Missy credit. In fact, some people call her the mother of Social Security. So she has this great influence on him.
So wait a minute, Darwin. So how did Eleanor handle? What did Eleanor think about all this?
Well, now this is you see, Eleanor treated Missy differently. In fact, some people said she treated her like, you know, how these Asian potentates used to have they'd have the older wife and then bring in the younger wife.
Yes.
So many people said that Eleanor treated Missy like junior wife.
Really?
And she was great with the family and everything. You see, Eleanor at this time was involved with her own romantic engagements, so she could no longer be the abused wife of 1918, because she too was carrying on a torrid affair. Mm. So she, in other words, it's called, the pot can't call the kettle black. And so anyway, Missy, there's tragedy ahead. Now, Missy totally guarded the president and was a powerful influence and pushed him to help what was called in the 30s the forgotten man. You know, the country was in a Great Depression and bread lines and unemployment and everything. So she was a powerful influence on him. And on September 1st, 1939, she was the only one who was allowed to wake him up. She woke him up and said, "Mr. Roosevelt, Nazi Germany has invaded Poland." And they both said, "Oh my God, this is going to be World War II." And she was just sort of in on everything. And
oh, wait a minute. Were they bedfellows?
Yes. That has been disputed by some historians, but now Catherine Smith, who wrote The Gatekeeper, she had access now for the first time to a treasure trove of Missy's letters from Roosevelt and his letters to her. And she has two grandnieces who, once they saw Catherine Smith's interest, they've now put all these letters and documents up for sale, and for $4 million. I suspect the New York Historical Society will want to buy them, but suddenly these things have taken on value because it discloses things about FDR's administration. Now, I've been following these things for years, but I would say the average American have never heard of these women, really. Then Missy was attending a dinner in 1941 at the White House, and she collapsed, and they took her upstairs to her bedroom, and she had a stroke, and the stroke left her paralyzed, and she could only utter just one or two basic words. She never was able to speak again, and it was a great tragedy. Of course, she had to give up her job, and she went back to New England as an invalid. And but Roosevelt was very kind to her. He changed his will and gave her half of his estate, and the other half went to Eleanor.
Really?
Yeah, he missed her very much, and he moved her back in 1944 when he was running for a fourth term. He was ill himself at this time, and oh God, this is horrible. She saw Princess Martha of Sweden, who had sort of taken her place, not on a political level, but she was sitting with Roosevelt at dinners and riding with him in the car, and she became so distressed that she couldn't speak and move. So at the White House, she set herself on fire.
Oh, boy, Darwin.
This drama is just, it sounds like I'm making all this up.
Yeah, I know.
It just sounds unbelievable. But, sometimes they say true life is stronger than fiction.
Oh, wow.
And then she had to go back. Now, she died that year. She died that Christmas, and which meant that she lost her position as Roosevelt's heir. He died in April of 1945. So all of his estate then went to Eleanor. But Missy had this great legacy in the White House, and was such an influence on him, particularly that thing about being the so-called mother of Social Security. I bet there are millions of Americans who are glad that she did that.
Yes, I want to ask you a question, though, about this. So how was Eleanor about her, knowing that of Eleanor's liberal modus operandi, and did she eventually like Missy? Yes,
they got along very well. She was a surrogate mother to the Roosevelt children because, see, Eleanor was gone most of the time. She led a very independent life, and she traveled all the time. She was in New York all the time. Her children found her very cold, but I want to present another side of her. But she was warm toward humanity. Now, during when her husband was running for president in 1932, Lorena Hickok, and she was nicknamed Hick, a terrible name to call someone a Hick, but that was her name. And she asked to cover the Eleanor Roosevelt campaign. She was speaking for her husband when he was running for president, and since he was paralyzed, she had to, Mrs. Eleanor, let's call her Eleanor. Eleanor had to attend many meetings, go to many rallies, political rallies like Hillary and Donald Trump today, and Hick was by her side at all times. Well, during this 4-month period, campaigns for president was shorter, thank God, in those days, and the two women fell in love, and they developed a powerful, powerful friendship. In fact, Hick influenced Eleanor's political lean. Eleanor was always sort of a liberal woman, far more liberal than her husband, but Hick brought her to areas like in West Virginia and places where people were literally starving to death. And so she had great influence on Eleanor's political thinking. And they developed this warm, wonderful relationship. Oddly enough, she seemed to show more affection to Hick than she did her children, and certainly not her husband. By then, Eleanor and Franklin had more or less a political alliance, more than a mother, husband and wife. And now Hick wore these baggy clothes. She had a very husky voice, and she was a hard bourbon drinker and cigarette smoker, and she played a mean game of poker. She swore she could beat any man at poker. And somehow Eleanor then moved her into the White House. She had the room across from Eleanor, and they had their best friends were quote married couple, lesbians. I'm using marriage in quotes because same-sex marriage, of course, was not legal. And then maybe because of her drinking or whatever, Hick became, diabetes can be mild or severe. She developed a severe case of diabetes. And then as Eleanor became First Lady, she had less and less time for Hick. But she got her various posts because she had to resign as a reporter for the AP because her copy on the Roosevelts was no longer, it was not objective. It was too pro-Roosevelt, and her bosses wanted a more objective look. And by the time of the 1930s were coming to an end, their romantic relationship ended, although they would remain friends very close friends for the rest of their life. Now, a lot of people have questioned whether that was a romantic relationship, but the letters have now been published, and I'll just read two lines to, as someone says, who was doing a biography, it means what it means. And she said, she wrote to Hick and said, Hick wrote back to Eleanor and says, I've been trying to bring back your faith. She was in New York at the time. Recalling the feeling of that soft spot just northeast of the corner of your mouth against my lips. That's pretty. And then Eleanor wrote, all day I thought of you. Oh, I want to put my arms around you. I ache to hold you close. So this is the very normal, very reserved. Eleanor could show a little passion there.
So wait. My question is, because you see, because there really was no form of communication on the outside like we have today, did people know of all this and they just ignored it?
Only the inner circle. Only the inner circle. And of course they knew, because it was very obvious. And Eleanor knew that they had to be very secretive. And Eleanor even had her own lodge at Hyde Park, and they had gardens. And Franklin always say, "Well, Eleanor's off with her girls doing gardening this weekend." He seemed very, very tolerant of it, actually. And in fact, I think he was sort of relieved that he could go about his duty and not have Eleanor chastising him. And so, in a way, they gave each other their freedom.
But what about the children? Now, did their children, they must have known something was going on.
Yes, James Roosevelt denied there was a relationship between, but Elliot Roosevelt, I'm sure you remember him, was sort of like his father's valet. He helped him get dressed in the morning, and he helped him get in and out of, take a bath, and he was very close to his father. And he actually wrote a book, and I have it upstairs. I read this book, And he said the first time he knew of a relationship between Missy and his father was when he walked in on them, and Missy was sitting on FDR's lap, kissing him passionately. And then FDR admitted to his son that he was paralyzed. His legs were paralyzed, but shall we say some other parts of him were in working order? Is that?
Yeah, no, and there are many people like this, where they have children and they're...
Yes.
So
yes,
I understand that,
sure.
but and I just was curious, so that all this was going on, and the immediate family and the husband, the wife, they knew, but it was kept from the public.
Of it.
It's kept from the public.
They were
Interesting.
Accepting. By then, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt were voted the two most famous people on earth, according to the Gallup poll, and certainly now. Just to finish with Eleanor, after Roosevelt died, she was photographed and interviewed. She had one bag she had taken from the White House. Her other stuff would be moved later. And she arrived in Grand Central, and reporters crowded around her. And she said, "The story's over, fellows." And she was going to become a recluse. And it was Hick who urged her to get back, to stay involved. And Harry Truman then appointed her to lead the commission. They say in the long run of time, maybe one of the most significant things ever done. At the United Nations, she chaired the group that adopted the first statement in the history of the world on human rights for all people in all countries. And at the last minute, before a vote was counted, the Soviet Union delegation objected, and Eleanor Roosevelt, in one of the power plays of her life, pounded down the gavel, ruled the Soviet Union out of order, and the legislation passed.
We need her back again.
I thought that was Eleanor's greatest hour,
Yep,
and she will live in history. Now, she also died in 1962, and she was called the greatest woman of the 20th century, and I knew her in the last 3 years of her life through my connection with the Miami Herald, and I totally agree with no other First Lady has quite matched her yet. We'll see, maybe if Hillary is elected, what her legacy would be. But up to now, I would give my vote to Eleanor Roosevelt. And now, Hick lived until 68, and it's a little sad because she died alone and in ill health, and she was cremated, and her ashes sat on the shelf in the funeral parlor for 20 years, and then finally someone buried her in an unmarked grave.
No kidding.
So I'm glad that these two women were so powerful. Now, before someone chastises me, I want to just mention Frances Perkins, who was also, she wasn't in the White House, but she was the Secretary of Labor, the first woman ever appointed to a cabinet, and she came in with Roosevelt in 1933 and up until April of 1945 when he died. And she also was very influential in all the New Deal. So you had not only Hick and Missy, but you had Madam Perkins, who was a great, great labor leader and helped save this country from. Actually, there were threats that many people wanted to go communistic, and Perkins was a great innovator in the labor movement and unions, and she also urged Roosevelt on the Social Security Act.
Wow, this is a great conversation because these really are little-known facts, and I love this. And though there have always been powerful women around, especially Franklin Roosevelt. I mean, I would say that he may have had his quirks, but he was brilliant himself, but he appreciated women, and I like that. And they never had any daughters. They just had sons, right?
Yeah. No, they had a daughter.
Oh, Anna. They had Anna, right?
Anna Roosevelt.
Yeah, sorry.
The thing that I've been reading so much, people are writing that Hillary would certainly be innovative. No one's been a president, but I wanted to say that I'm glad these books have come out, but it showed that women have played in the Roosevelt administration. Of course, there were other women before her, but they played a great role here in shaping the power and the structure and the politics and whatever of the United States. I keep going back to Social Security. That was a damn
that's
thing.
great. Well, Darwin, thank you. We have enjoyed this so much today. I didn't know what you were going to talk about, but this was lovely. And I will talk to you.
Know what I'm going to
Right.
talk
I will talk to you after the election.
Well, I think I'll be up all night.
So will I. And I'll talk to you again. Thank you so much.
I just heard, Anita, on NBC, they said we may know by 10:20 on election night.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see.
Thank you, Darwin.